Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much for joining us today and for a very interesting, friendly panel discussion where Melissa Mipton and Shijing Fu share their experiences as delegates to Science Meets Parliament 2023. So every year, the SSA sponsors two early career statisticians to attend this event organized by Science and Technology Australia. In 2023, more than 300 attendees and almost 100 parliamentarians spent the day at Parliament House, engaged in discussions and meetings about the role of science and technology in Australian future. Come and hear Melissa and Shijing answer questions about their expectations of the day, how they prepare to meet an MP, and other lessons they learned. There will be a time of open questions at the end. So for today's talk, we're gonna have Melissa and Shijing spend like 5 minutes to introduce this event to us. Then we'll move on to a panel discussion, roughly about 30 minutes. And you are most welcome to just ask any question to Shijing and Melissa during the panel discussion as well. At the end, we're going to have 10 to 15 minutes as an open Q&A session. So feel free to put your question into the chat window, and we're going to take that as we go. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you about our panelists today. Melissa is a postdoc biostatistician working at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. She finished her PhD in biostats through the University of Melbourne in early 2023, where her research focused on evaluating statistical methods for handling missing data in observational studies. More recently, Melissa's research has focused on Bayesian methods for adaptive platform trials, and she is currently part of the statistical team for an innovative adaptive platform trial developed to improve outcome from preterm birth. Yeah, I think I got that right. Sorry for that if I missed anything. Shijing is a graduate student at the Curtin Institute of Radio Astronomy, based in Perth, Western Australia. His research involves the application of Bayesian techniques to the analysis of astronomical time series and other fancy stuff, namely light curves from radio, optical, and X-ray surveys. His other activities include being secretary of the WA branch of the SSA and delivering art training as a certified commentary instructor. Right, over to you, Melissa and Shijing.
All right, can everybody hear me? Yep, okay, so thanks G for that introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. So today, Melissa and I are going to talk a little bit about our experiences at Science Meets Parliament, which happened earlier this year. Now, I appreciate that for our cousins over in New Zealand, you might not know what Science Meets Parliament is. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just introducing what that is before we actually go into this. What will be just an open question time. We've got some guided questions, but otherwise you can ask anything you like. All right, so. But first of all, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and New Zealand and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to the elders past and present. Okay, so there's the outline I was saying. So the thing to know about Science Meets Parliament, although we talk about it as a single event, it actually has two parts this year. So I'm going to talk about the Science Meets Parliament online part, and Melissa will talk about the on the hill being Parliament Hill down in Canberra, where Australian Parliament happens to be. Okay, so this is straight out of the web page for the event. So Science Meets Parliament is an occasion that happens every single year. It's organised by an organisation called Science and Technology Australia. They're kind of like an advocacy or lobby group for STEM in Australia, and they represent all disciplines. So Melissa and I obviously went as representatives of the Statistical Society, but there were all kinds of scientists of all different disciplines who were there, and indeed policymakers as well. So like I said, there was two parts. There was SMP Online, which happened over 3 days in early March. And then a couple of weeks later, there was SMP on the Hill, which is where we all flew down to Canberra and actually spent the day in Parliament House. So just to give you an idea what the two components are, the online part was sort of a preparation and sort of training so that we could best make use of our time when we're at Parliament House in person, meeting other STEM experts, meeting other advocates, and meeting parliamentarians as well. So just to give you a really brief idea of what the SMP Online was, is we had keynote speakers and a whole lot of panel discussions. And basically, because it was online, it didn't matter where you were in Australia or in the country, you could dial in. So there were two really great keynote speakers. So many of you would have heard of Terence Tao. They call him the greatest living mathematician of our time right now. So he gave sort of the opening address, talked about how maths can save the world. It was really enlightening, and it was more of a fireside chat, talking about how mathematics as a sort of gateway into STEM really has helped transform everything, and that we can actually be really optimistic about how, in Australia in particular, that we can use mathematics to drive the next sort of generation of innovation. So that was the first keynote. The second day, we had another keynote from Catalin Carrico. She's really topical, because she's the one person who helped discover mRNA and actually brought that into the scientific community. So she got to share about that, but more, not so much about mRNA, but more about her journey as a scientist, particularly as a female scientist as well, and how the perseverance and getting through and speaking to the right people at the right time helped to get her science out there. And of course, we all know that mRNA played a really big part in the development of vaccines for COVID. So those are our two keynote speakers. And then the rest of the program was chock full of other kinds of panel discussions. And so I summarized them on this particular slide. And there's sort of 4 different categories we had. The first, we had some which were, like you see on the top left there, they're just about introducing us to how the political system works in Australia. So Civics 101, Houses of Parliament, what senators do, how they represent, how voting happens, all that sort of stuff. And then we also had a parliamentary forum where we basically had a panel of MPs who we could actually ask questions for. Now, the really interesting thing about this is, because this particular thing happened during a sitting week of Parliament, halfway through the panel, these bells started ringing in the background. And what these bells signify is that there's going to be a vote in Parliament. And so they all had to get up and leave halfway through our panel to go and vote in the House. So it actually was sort of a view into democracy in action. So that, unfortunately, was cut a little bit short, but it was really great to actually speak to some politicians for the limited time that they were there, anticipating that we're actually going to meet some of them in person. So those are the first topics. There are other topics actually preparing for when we actually go and meet an MP. So a big part of Science Meets Parliament is that every delegate is allocated a sort of 10-15-minute slot to speak with a voluntarily who's volunteered their time to speak to an MP. And so obviously want to make good use of that time. So there were various sessions about how to prepare your sort of 2-minute pitch, and how do you advocate for your particular discipline or for your particular passion in an effective way. And then there were other talks about First Nations and how First Nations knowledge impacts on science in Australia, and how we need to respect and actually move forward together in advancing science, knowing that the Indigenous culture in Australia in particular is, the longest enduring culture in the globe, and they have a lot actually to contribute, but that we shouldn't just exploit and take advantage of them. We actually need to involve them in the process. And lastly, there were some sort of more general topics about the state of geopolitics in our region and how to commercialize. So Science Meets Parliament Online was basically a prep, and it was quite intense. Luckily, all the sessions were recorded, so we can go back and re-watch them if you wanted to. But there was trying to set the tone so that when we end up coming to Canberra, we had a better idea of what to expect and how to conduct ourselves in an effective way. So that's basically what the first part of Science Meets Parliament was. All right, I'll hand over to Melissa.
Great, thank you, Shijing. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about On the Hill, what we actually did when we went up to Canberra. So this the On the Hill aspect could have been broken down really into 4 elements. So as Xi Qing mentioned, every delegate who elected to do so was allocated a time slot with a parliamentarian where we actually got to sit down and talk about the science that we do and what are the issues that matter to us as scientists with that parliamentarian. But during the day, there was a number of scheduled events. So in the morning, we did have a couple of panel discussions. So you can see here is on the left side of the screen is myself and Xi Qing in the morning arriving at Parliament House, which was very exciting. But on the left of the screen, on the right of the screen, we can see the theatre that they had at Parliament House. And it's just chock-a-block full of all the scientists who had come across from every part of Australia to be there. And so 2 of the panel discussions we had in the morning was the Seizing the Future, a science leadership dialogue. And with this, we had the Nobel laureate Professor Brian Schmidt, who is the Vice Chancellor and President of the Australian National University, as well as Professor Chris Matthews, who is a Quandamooka mathematician and an ATSIMA chair and the National Indigenous STEM Professionals Network Leadership Committee member. The second panel discussion that we had was Forging a New Golden Era of Australian Scientists. And this had Professor Sarath Sringram, who was an STA president-elect. It also had Sally-Ann Williams, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Cicada Innovations and the Chair of Diversity in STEM Review. There was also Dr. Anita Go, who is a medical researcher and Science and Technology Australian Vice President, and Dr. Jane Fitzpatrick, the Chief Executive Officer for the Australian National Fabrication Facility. Now, unfortunately, I can't talk much about what was actually discussed during these panel discussions because, as I mentioned, we had our parliamentarian meetings throughout the day, and my parliamentarian meeting fell right in the middle of these discussions. So Xi Qing, if you could go to the next slide. So I was allocated to meet the Honourable David Coleman, who is the Shadow Minister for Communications, and we had some wonderful discussions. We were in a small group. There was 3 of us in my group, and we had some great discussions about how science communication is important, but also how communication can affect mental health. So David Coleman did have quite a strong involvement in mental health, particularly at the adolescent level. And as a communications minister, he really wanted to talk about, we had another person in my group was doing research on how social media impacts adolescent mental health. And so that really was of interest to him, and we had some good conversations around that. And unfortunately, I didn't get a photo with David Coleman. However, Xi Qing got to meet Senator David Shoebridge, and as you can see here on the screen, they got a lovely photo, and I believe Xi Qing gifted him something related to the research that he is conducting over in WA. So you can ask Xi Qing more questions around that a bit later. So there are 2 of the parts of the On the Hill. So Xi Qing, next slide. The third one was that we did have the option to go to the National Press Club of Australia address, which on that particular day was held by the Honourable Ed Husick, the Minister for Industry and Science. And during his address here, he really acknowledged the fact that the First Nations people are our first scientists, and as Xi Qing mentioned earlier, that we do need to acknowledge the knowledge that they hold and move forward with them, not just capitalising on the knowledge they have and really moving together with them. And during this address, he did actually announce quite a special announcement. It was the appointment of Professor Alex Brown to the board of the CSIRO. And Alex Brown is believed to be the first Indigenous scientist to be important. So this was quite a big announcement for him to make on the day. If you can go to the next slide, please, Xi Qing. All right, and then the final aspect of the day was the gala dinner. So this was quite a grand event. It was very lovely. If you can have a look down in the bottom right corner there, it was such a grand ballroom at Parliament House where all the attendees got to go. And we had a number of guest speakers come in. So again, we had the Honourable Ed Husick, the Minister for Industry and Science, come talk to us. But we also had the co-chairs of Parliamentary Friends of Science, the Honourable Richard Marles, who is also the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Honourable Karen Andrews, who is the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs. And during their talk, it was really nice to see the Deputy Prime Minister have a call to action for a cultural shift in how we view science. But also we had Karen Andrews, who really talked about how we need to make science accessible to the parliamentarians. She really advocated for Science Meets Parliament because it is a way for a lot of parliamentarians who don't normally engage in science or hear a lot about science to have access to what is happening and what matters to the scientists of Australia. And the fourth speaker we had was the Honourable Paul Fletcher, who is the Shadow Minister for Science, and he really advocated for bipartisan support for science and noted that Australians are on the forefront. And I can't remember if it was Paul Fletcher or Richard Marles, but one of them was very excited for the geeks to be in charge. So that was good to hear. I think that's the end of what I have for On the Hill.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Just before we go into the panel, sorry, G, to interrupt you. We'll do this now rather than the end, but we really want to acknowledge that the SSA supported both of us to attend Science Meets Parliament. So 2 delegates attend every year. So they covered the registration, flights, transport, and accommodation. So particularly for someone flying over from Western Australia, that was really valuable. And I encourage anyone, after you hear what we talk about today, if you're interested, apply to be the delegate for next year, because I think you'll find it worthwhile. Back to you, Eugene. Perfect.
Thanks very much, Xiqing and Melissa. And I think that's quite important, given that we don't have such a luxury in New Zealand to meet the politicians. It's also good to see scientists getting mingling with the politicians so we can make bigger impact. Before we move on to our panel discussion, we've got one question from Lisa asking, well, first of all, it's a comments. Lisa said, it sounds like a really interesting opportunity in many parts of industry. AI seems to get more airtime than statistics. So now it's the question for you and Melissa. From your perspective, how do you think we can get more attention on the value of traditional stats on science, medicine, etc.? You can decide to answer this later, or we just get there now. It's up to you.
Melissa, you have anything to say?
Off the top of my head, I think it's trying to bring out that we can use AI and traditional statistics together. It's not so much a focus on one or the other. It's how they can work together, I guess. Do you have any thoughts, Xiqing?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because it comes down to a little bit of marketing. I think it's as much a marketing question. None of us would doubt the value of traditional statistics. It's just that AI, I think, has entered the sort of consumer eye now, and so that makes it a bit easier to talk about. I think what we might have to do is sort of use AI, the term AI, as a sort of in to start talking about statistics more broadly. And if people start questioning, really, is AI a really good idea? Can we trust it? Then we can start talking maybe about the statistics behind it and how it's not actually the Wild West. There's actually a lot of stuff we know that we can actually bring to bear. So yeah, I think it's as much a marketing question. But certainly I think it's up to statisticians to advocate. I don't think we can rely on journalists and the media to do that for us, because they probably just kind of follow the hype. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. And yeah, I agree. And just to add on that, I think if you dissect AI technology and the nitty-gritty behind AI is actually stats plus math, right? And we share a lot of like overlapping skills. If you consider even for traditional stats, we still need to do a little bit coding and understand the models. And this is not new to us, like what Shiqing said. So if we break down what AI really is, it's going to help us to promote our traditional stats on science and medicine. Well, that's a really good question. Thanks, Lisa. And like I said, feel free to drop your questions into the chat window. We will try to make this more interactive and engaging. Now, should we, I see another question coming up, but maybe we'll get this later. And let's get back to the Science Meets Parliament for now. And I'll probably just get started asking a question to you, Shiqing. How did you prepare for the event? I know it's a big, probably not a big challenge for you, but still a challenge for you to get to meet the politicians. How did you get ready for that? And yeah.
Yeah, and I think many of the delegates probably who hadn't worked in that space needed some preparation, and that really was what those 3 days of Science Meets Parliament Online was all about. To not only understand the system that we're stepping into, the sort of policy making, public policy sort of stakeholder sort of sphere, but also thinking about my own research and how I might cast it in an accessible way so they can quickly get things across. So the online training was a big help. As for the actual meeting with an MP, so I got to meet Senator David Shoebridge, who was a Green senator from New South Wales. I went online and I read all about what he was interested in, the speeches that he made, and all this sort of to get an idea of whether or not there was any kind of overlap between my interests and his. Turns out there was quite little, but that was fine because it was an opportunity for him to speak to a group of STEM professionals, scientists and statisticians and so on, whom he otherwise wouldn't. So I have to say, I don't think I prepared perfectly well, but I think the 3 days online definitely gave me the preparation. Obviously, having been there, my idea of how to prepare has changed, but I think that was all that we had at the time. Yeah. Anything different from you as well?
Great. I think it's it's very important to identify common interests before starting any conversation. So that's great to learn. Thanks, Shiqing. What about you, Melissa? Do you have anything to share with us?
Yeah, so I agree with Shiqing that the online training was really important for helping me to think about how to kind of convey the research that I do. It's it's very methodology based. It's not very accessible. So really thinking about how to break that down into layman's terms, make it important to somebody else. It's very important to me, and I know it should be important for other people as well. But just trying to help them see that was really good, and some of the takeaways I took from the online training. The other one, as Shiqing said, was I spent a lot of time researching the parliamentarian I was going to meet, and like Shiqing, I didn't have a lot in common with my parliamentarian, but I did go back through and have a look at some of the things that he had spoken to, for example, in his maiden speech to Parliament, see what were the issues that were important to him, and tried to find that common ground that I can say, hey, we both have interest in this area. For example, he was previously very involved in a lot of the techie space. So coming at him from a statistics point of view and the computational work that we do, I could find some common ground there with him.
Nice. And I think we are now leading to sort of your hopes and expectation from this event, right? Can you tell us a little bit on that, Melissa? What's your hopes or expectations from this event?
So I didn't really go in with an issue to advocate for. I didn't have any expectations of having a continuing relationship or particular outcomes resulting from this. I really went into it just hoping to start these conversations and, open that door to future communication with a parliamentarian and breach that bridge between science and Parliament.
Oh, yeah, nice. Really cool. And what about you, Shiqing?
Yeah, so I should say, in answer to the earlier question, another way I went to prepare was actually speak to previous delegates. But unfortunately, because of COVID, previous years were all completely online, so we never had the in-person bit, so they weren't that helpful. But I had these grand ideas of going in and advocating for statistics and having some kind of really bold impact on whoever I spoke to. So that was my hope. I don't think I quite hit that. I think I did have some kind of impact. But really, like, and when I applied to be one of the representatives of SSA, you write a little spiel about what you think you can get out of it. And one of them was, the training. I was hoping to be upskilled in how to advocate for statistics, and is particularly speaking to non-statisticians or people who perhaps aren't numerate at all. They're from other disciplines is their background. But also I wanted to build some kind of professional connection with someone who wasn't just another statistician, so a politician perhaps, or some kind of policymaker. During the training, we were told that it's not just like senators and MPs never make decisions without advice. And if they're in the government, then they're advised by their agency, the department. So there are those kind of connections that you might want to form as well. So I was hoping to build some of those as well. Yeah, those are probably my two main hopes, to advocate for stats to non-statisticians, learn how to do that, and build some kind of connection. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Because even though you didn't get through your ambitious goals, but it's still nice to give a shot, right? It's always good training for early career statisticians, and good to see that you are advocating for statistics. And just based on your experience, what was the highlight of the event, Xing?
So despite not being sort of this ambassador for the SSA in the way that I imagined, I think the highlight was sort of an ongoing highlight. It was actually all the incidental conversations that I had with everybody else who was there, right? So sure, we had this sort of this idea, okay, I get to meet an MP, and lobbyists pay tens of thousands of dollars to arrange these meetings, and we're getting in there more or less for free. But actually, we took over the entire Parliament House for that day, pretty much. Every corner there was some scientist. And so while we were just standing around having coffee, or while we were waiting in line for our lunch, or just walking around, there were so many people, and we all had badges on to say what society or what organization. So the highlight was really talking to so many different people. And these were people who, were really passionate about what they do, and quite optimistic, and were looking to the future. So I think the highlight was definitely not so much the network, the sort of connection with the MP, but actually the network with all the other people who were there. So that was definitely the highlight. I mean, the gala dinner was also fun. It was nice to be in Canberra. I mean, I hadn't had a in-person gathering for years, so that was refreshing. But I have to say, yeah, it was all the incidental chats and discussions that I had.
That's great. And I have to add that you probably want to repeat your story about the Bill of Democracy interrupting your meeting, because that's interesting as well. And
yeah.
So what about you, Melissa? What was the highlight from your perspective?
So very, very much the same. I particularly liked the gala dinner. So as Shooting said, throughout the day, we had lots of incidental meetings with other scientists around Australia, but at the gala dinner, it was really an opportunity for us to sit down and have really in-depth conversations with people doing science around Australia. And so that was really great. I got to meet lots of different people who I may not have met normally, and hear about how they use data in very different industries to what I'm in, which was great.
Oh, nice. I'm sure they fit you well in that dinner as well. And just add on that, what was say important lesson or take-home message you learned from the event, Melissa? Can you share that with us a little bit?
So for me, one of the important lessons that I learned is that my work, so I went in there talking towards the end of my PhD. So I had just spent 4 years prior to that in my little PhD bubble, working on a very niche topic. And I think for me, one of the most important lessons that I learned is that work that I'm doing it's not just important to me, and it's not just interesting to me. There were a lot of people there who I met where my work had applications in their research as well. So it was great to see that the work that I'm doing does have this wide reach, not just to parliamentarians and policymakers, but to other scientists around Australia.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because your research impact gets amplified through the public engagement and communication. That's very important for us to learn. And what about you, Shiqing? Do you have anything to add?
I think I briefly mentioned this earlier. I think it really, our job as scientists or statisticians probably isn't finished until we've actually communicated and advocated for our profession ourselves. I think we used to be able to rely on the media to sort of, okay, there's some interesting discovery and they'll write about it and promulgate it. But I think that age is sort of gone, especially when they're looking for headlines and sort of sensational sort of things. So it really comes down to scientists to speak and advocate for themselves.
Yeah,
And in my chat with the senator, we asked him, so how is it that you find out, if you've got a scientific question that you need answering, how do you do it? Well, they go to think tanks and these sorts of, which aren't purely scientific research organizations, right? They are policy sort of formulating bodies, but they also need to get their information from somewhere. And so who do they ask? Well, they ask the people who are vocal or who they believe are, front runners in their field. But unless a scientist steps up and makes themselves known and then advocates, I think, we do the public a disservice. So yeah, we can't rely on other people to advertise what we do for ourselves. I think it's up to us to do it ourselves.
yeah, no, that's really important that we have to promote our science and our work more, so people get to know more about what we are doing. And like what Melissa said, it's actually not probably as boring as you would expect to share your science with others, even though it's very specialized and it's quite specific in your own area, but it does sometimes interest more people than you would expect. But that's very important for us to hear that. Thank you very much.
I guess, sorry, Jay, I might add one more thing. It's not just our outcomes or discoveries, but also the process that we went through to get there. I think the idea is that I think science in Australia might be a bit sort of failure averse, and so we don't invest unless we're sure we're going to get some outcome or some return from it. But the idea is that, like, before we get that, for example, the keynote, before she had that breakthrough with mRNA, she had all these other failures on the way there, but we only hear about the end product. I think it's important for us to also speak about the process of science.
Yeah.
The process of getting to the right answer, in inverted commas, having gone down all these other blind alleys. So the media aren't going to talk about the process. In fact, they don't know really much about the process. It's really up for scientists and STEM professionals to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very important as well for us as early career statisticians, because you want to expect any success in next day, and sometimes failures do happen, and you just need to embrace that as you go and trying to keep what you're doing and stay passionate. And that's very interesting for us to learn. And I'm probably just going to change a little bit. So Xiqing, apart from the bell, what else was surprising to you?
What else was surprising? Well, I think there was just the atmosphere of it. I think maybe because I've been locked up in Perth for so long, I'm not unable to go out and about. I was really surprised by the energy and the optimism. I mean, Science and Technology Australia as an organization, they market this as their flagship. And of course, they talk it up. We've had all these news stories about how science funding and university funding, there's all this doom and gloom. But I was really surprised at just how optimistic this group of people were. And these weren't just, they weren't sort of, I don't think they were, just imagining it and just putting it on. These were genuinely optimistic and were committed to actually make change rather than sort of sit back and complain and wait for things to happen. So I was really, I felt a little bit, I felt my reaction was a bit underwhelming, considering how optimistic and empowering and passionate everybody else was. So that was a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. What about you, Melissa? Anything that surprised you? Or
I was actually quite surprised throughout the online training, but also on the Hill, at just how open and receptive parliamentarians and policymakers and media personalities are to hearing from scientists and hearing about the issues that matter to us, and talking about our processes and these great outcomes that we are coming up with. So there were a number of training sessions during the online portion of the program that did feature a number of journalists and newscasters who were saying, if you've got a story, just approach us, come up and tell us about it. We can't find you unless you're there. So it was really good to hear that. And the same with the parliamentarians. They're always open for an email to be sent to them. If you've got something interesting, something that maybe matters to them, feel free to reach out to them. They are there for the people and they are happy to hear from the people.
Yeah, that's very important for us to know as early career statisticians. So you need to reach out to your audience, and they can't find you if they don't know you exist. So you need to tell your story to others so everybody can learn from you. And that's very cool. So I'm a bit curious because your talks, Melissa and Shiqing, mentioned quite a few times about Indigenous knowledge. And that's similar to what we call Matranga or Tikanga in New Zealand. So that's our Indigenous knowledge. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you learned about this and what's the discussion now in Australia around this topic? Oh, Melissa, you can start it.
So as I mentioned, I wasn't there for the earlier talk that did have a lot of discussions around the Indigenous peoples and how we can use their knowledge and move forward with them. But I do know that there is a strong advocacy for data sovereignty in the Indigenous peoples in Australia, and making sure that their voices are being heard and counted, and their data is collected correctly to make sure that their experiences are counted properly.
Yeah, that's really good. What about you, Shiqing? Anything you want to add on that topic?
Yeah, so I'll be the first to admit that I don't know that much in this particular area. So I actually got to hear a lot of new things. But one thing that I was really impressed was that in spite of the terrible experiences of First Nations people in Australia, they are still choosing to put that aside and want to continue to move forward together, right? So in spite of all that hurt, and they want to stand up and advocate for themselves, but they also want to progress science and our country, so they're not, at least the people who I heard from, they weren't sort of bitter and jaded. So look, we acknowledge the past, there needs to be truth telling, but we want to move forward and put the right structures in place and progress together as one people. So I was really impressed by that. And in some way, their desire for reconciliation, if that's the right word, far exceeds, I think, what we on the other side have met with. So I think there's lots of scope, and I think if we can promote that and get on board with that, and yeah, so like things like intellectual property rights and respecting their knowledge holders, and understand there are some knowledges that we don't have the right to know about yet. They're not ready to share with us yet, and not seeing that as a sort of cultural block, but as a mark of respect, and that as we earn the right in some ways to probe and go into the thousands and thousands of years of knowledge that they have, then yeah, we can progress together as one country together. So that was something that I learned a lot, was that in spite of their past histories, they're still courageously want to move forward together. So that's really great.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks very much for sharing that. And so I wonder, it's been a while since you attended that event, right? What has happened ever since? Have you been in touch with the senator or deputy prime minister? You've been in contact by email. So what's the story behind that, Shiqing?
So I met with Senator David Shoebridge. So he's a Green senator from New South Wales. So I'm in Western Australia. So we didn't really have that much in common. And his background is as a barrister and was in state politics. And the Greens have a particular agenda, which is different from the government and the opposition. So during the actual talk, it was just a nice, friendly talk, but he did connect me to his WA colleague, who's the Green spokesman for science, Dorinda Cox. So yeah, so he's his what do you call his advisor connected me to Dorinda's advisor, and so the institute that I'm based at now have an ongoing relationship already, and so this was sort of to add to that. So that's ongoing. Obviously, right now the political landscape's quite sort of taken up by the Voice, and while we were there in Canberra, AUKUS was on the submarine, or not just submarines, but the defense spending. And so you have to time your emails right, because if you email them in the middle of something like this, like the referendum Australia's about to have, it's going to get drowned out. So I'm still sort of waiting for a response. So that was one thing. At the gala dinner, I sat next to an MP of electorate, which is very close to me, and actually in Perth. So that was really great. And so he's invited me to come and speak to him more about what we do at my institute. So there's sort of this sort of slow burn. There's not sort of these huge dramatic transformations and changes, particularly for someone who's early in their career. I can't say that I don't have a group or a lab or something, but they're these sort of beginnings of relationships of what I've got.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks, Yuqing. What about you, Melissa?
Yeah, so I haven't reached out to the parliamentarian that I met with. Similar to, as Yuqing mentioned, there's a lot happening in Parliament at the moment, and a little email from a postdoc in Victoria isn't going to make it high up on the list, but I will probably reach out to them again, just to reiterate some of the points that I brought up in our meeting, probably towards the end of the year once things have settled down a little bit.
Nice, that's really good to hear. So you've done your part and you're enjoying that. And I guess for those people attending us today online, they're probably going to ask for your advice if they're going to attend a seminar event next year or in the future. So Melissa, do you have any advice for the next year's attendees?
Yeah, I do. So with the parliamentarian chat or the meeting that we had, I went into it very stressed, thinking it was going to be a very formal conversation, that I needed to have evidence to back up my claims. I needed to throw stats at them, and it was very much not that. There was a lot of the prep work that I didn't use, and it was great to have that prep work. As I said, I'll probably email them later in the year, and it's good to have that prep work to support conversations in a bit of a longer letter. But the meeting itself was very much just driven by the passions that everyone in the room had, and you tend to talk a lot more from the heart. So I think taking a lot of the stress out of that meeting would really help if you were attending in the future. But also I just had some advice for people who maybe are unsure if they want to attend or not. You don't necessarily need to have an issue to advocate for. You don't need to go in with grand ideas of I want to change this aspect of science. If you've got an interest in science communication or just how science can impact policy making or policy decisions, I would strongly recommend you apply and try and go to Science Meets Parliament, because it is a great opportunity for that as well.
Oh, great. That's very good advice for the next year's attendees. And what about you, Yuqing? Any advice for us?
Yeah, something very similar. I think I was pretty well prepared given all the programs that we had. What I probably would change is just how much emphasis we put on the meeting with the MP, right? And actually see, it's actually in networking and meeting other STEM professionals. That's actually the main purpose for me in the end. And therefore preparing for that as much as preparing to meet an MP. So, but it turns out that in preparing your 3-minute pitch to speak to a parliamentarian, well, you actually use the same pitch to other scientists too in other areas. So that actually worked out really well. But don't revolve the whole trip about meeting MP, because for some people, they didn't even get to meet their senator, for example. I know somebody, because of important appointments, their meeting got cancelled. And so if that was the only reason why they went to Canberra was just to meet this person, well, it kind of got undermined at the last minute because of circumstances. So see Science with Parliament as a training event there to learn, see it as a networking event to meet other like-minded or, you know, unlike-minded people for that matter, to get different perspectives, and treat it as a journey into a different sphere of the world that you otherwise would never really get much insight to. Because even the way that policymakers think, because they're really interested in seeing the impact, right? It's all well and good to have some idea scientifically, but, you know, what is the social or economic impact it's going to have on people? Because that's why they're in government, to make impact on people. So that help, you know, to think about, you know, things in that terms as you're preparing. And lastly, more flippantly, I guess, is take photographs with every person you meet, get the contact details of every single person you meet, because you never know what may come of that. So, you know, some off comment or one day the MP might be visiting your institute and say, oh, actually, I know somebody from here, you know, and then you can be part of that. So yeah, take photographs of everybody, connect with them, and leverage it as much as you can. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really good advice. Thank you very much, Xiqing and Melissa. And I think that's us for the panel discussion. Now we are going to open up the chat window if you have any questions for Xiqing and Melissa. And I'll start with the question from Fiona. Did the parliamentarian have some suggestions about what would make science more accessible to them other than through Science Meet Parliament? Melissa mentioned that Karen Andrews advocated the importance of improving that accessibility. Any comments or
Yes, I just want to reiterate what Xiqing said earlier, is that we really need to put ourselves out there. They're not going to see this research, as we mentioned, parliamentarians aren't making these decisions themselves. They do have advisors that help them. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be scouring the literature to be finding the latest research and evidence. They really do rely on submissions that are made to Parliament. And these submissions can be as in-depth or as surfacey as you like. You can make them on the Parliament website, and they did advocate or suggest that we do make submissions if there is a topic that we feel passionate about. Put in a submission, and that's a really good way to get this science to the parliamentarians, because they do collate all those responses. But also, if you have a story, try and get it out in the media. If there's any way that your research can be made into a lovely, interesting story, try and put it out there. Reach out to the media personalities. They won't find you. You've got to find them.
That's great. Anything you want to add, Xiqing?
I think Melissa's pretty much covered it. And yeah, I mean, there is this thing called the Parliamentary Friends of Science. So just reiterate what Melissa said, that a lot of parliamentarians want to be informed, right? They go into politics in order to make an impact on society. So they're actually not, they're a soft target for knowledge and information, it turns out. So by all means, reach out to them and advocate and speak to them. But they are also time poor. So, you know, you put the main point first. You don't sort of have a long preamble. You don't structure it like a scientific paper where you have the intro and all that. So no, you go straight to the bottom line first and then sort of fill in afterwards. And so what starts off as maybe a brief email can then grow into a longer discussion later. Yeah.
That's great. And we got a very serious question for you guys to answer. If you are ready, what did you find were your greatest challenge in your early career?
Greatest challenge? Oh gosh. I'll have a crack. I mean, I don't think the challenges stop. I think early in the career, I think maybe the greatest challenge is having confidence in what you're doing. Because I think in the early career, you're quite timid and you think, well, I'm at the bottom of the tree. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of figuring things out. There's a bit of imposter syndrome. But I think you have to sort of trust the system a bit, trust your supervisor, supervision panel, a little bit, your boss, to give you that kind of guidance. And if you don't have someone who's like that, then look for a mentor or someone who will champion your cause for you to try and get over that. But that's definitely, and that challenge of being unsure of myself, I think pervades all lots of other aspects of your career, whether looking for a job, applying for positions, submitting a paper or something. I think that self-doubt can really be paralyzing if you don't have any other outside help. So I think that's probably sort of like a broad challenge. More specifically for statistics, I haven't come from a statistical background. I've come from computer science. So I spent a lot of time trying to connect with statisticians to understand what the profession's like. And organizations like the SSA have been a really big part of that. So being part of the profession or community has really benefited me a lot. So I think, when you're crossing into a new discipline, it's important to try and immerse yourself, I think.
That's a very good answer. You didn't just provide your challenge, you also provide your solution. That's great. And what about you, Melissa? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, so my greatest challenge in the early career has been overcoming that imposter syndrome and believing that I do deserve a seat at the table. I came into my PhD with a lot of heavyweights in my field, and trying to see myself as their peer was something that was just inconceivable. There was no way that I was on the same page where I should be having these conversations with people who have been doing this work for 20, 30 years plus. But really just trying to understand that you don't have to be an expert in everything. There's this great Venn diagram out there somewhere where you've got all the knowledge of statistics and then everyone's little knowledge just kind of touches it, and everyone's an expert in their own areas. And I think really learning that and appreciating the knowledge that I do have and the knowledge that I don't have was important for me to realize that I do belong here.
That's perfect, because I do know quite a few people share similar experience, but eventually they manage to go through that process and prove that it's not that hard just to be yourself. And it's always good that just to embrace who you are and trying to get on with it and enjoy your life. So I've got a question from Don, and I think it's asking, where do we apply for the next Science Meet Parliment? How do you guys find the link or place to apply for this event? Chiching and Melissa,
Yeah, so I think it was late last year, I think around about October, where the SSA announced. So the SSA, the Statistical Society of Australia, is one of the member organisations of Science and Technology Australia, and that means every year they get to send 2 delegates to Science Meets Parliament. And so it was in around about October, I think, where they advertised that they were accepting applications. So that's when I wrote my application to there. So just look out for that advertisement if you're a member of the SSA. If you're not a member of the SSA, I think you can just subscribe to the STA mailing list, and they'll let you know when applications are open. So yes, so you don't have to go as a representative organization. You can just go as a delegate yourself. Obviously, you fund yourself. But particularly for SSA, they always send early career statisticians because there's that training element.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add is that if you would like to attend this or similar events, you should always reach out to Shiching and Melissa, because they've got experience. Also, probably you can talk to your branch secretary or representative of SSA. I think that's your best bet to find out the knowledge or information you need. And another question from Don is that, can you apply for more than 1 year? I presume that means, do you want to go back to the Parliament to talk to similar bunch of politicians again? That's
I don't know. I don't know about
So
that.
Yeah, you can definitely attend the event more than 1 year, whether you can go as the SSA's representative and take up one of their delegates' positions. I'm not sure. I can't.
I presume question is about how to make a cumulative impact, but we can leave it there. Last question for today is how can we make stats more practical so that people can feel it over its theoretical aspect?
I'm not sure about what it means by more practical. I find statistics very practical, but I guess I'm already a statistician. Maybe going back to what I was saying earlier is that if we make statistics not just about the outcome and decision at the end, but about the process that you go through, I think that will make people think it's practical, because it's as much about formulating a question and going through the process of thinking through. It's much like the scientific process, really. And then thinking of the machinery that you're going to get, how you're going to collect your data, thinking about the process statistics, I think will appeal, even if the particular application might not be that relevant to a particular person. I mean, I'm not sure how much a farmer would care about, aeronautics or manufacturing. So I think if we talk a little bit about the machinery and the process and the mechanisms, I think that's one way. I mean, people talk about ChatGPT as it's really a technology which has many different applications, but it's really the process is where I think the practicality shines through. I mean, we all love to hear about, drug trials that produce better medicines and things. But I think if you talk about the processes more as well, yeah.
Cool. Anything you want to add, Melissa, on this?
This may be more specific to my area, so I'm in biostatistics, but I think is relating it to how it would affect somebody else. So for me, a lot of my work is in health research, and just the way that I convey a lot of the theoretical work we do is that it helps us to make sure we have more confidence in these decisions that we're making about your health. I think is really just relating it back to how it can impact on the person.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because whenever you want to start a conversation with anyone, you want to read your audience, because it only becomes practical if you know what their problems are. If you don't know what their problems are, you're trying just to talk through your own research, it's going to be very, very theoretical to anyone, even like those parties, statisticians, like what Melissa said, not everyone is expert in every field. So that's a very good comment. Thank you very much. And I guess let me just do a final check before we go. Yep. I think that's us for today. Thank you very much, Shih-Ching and Melissa, for this very interesting, exciting session about Science Meets Parliament.